Welcome back everyone, my name is Nick930, and today we're going to look back at the fourth game in the Battlefield franchise, Battlefield 2142. Battlefield 2142 released by DICE in fall 2006 for the PC, and was made on Refactor Engine 2.0, the same engine used to make Battlefield 2. This game was released only a year after Battlefield 2, and many criticized the game and called it a simple reskin. But Battlefield 2142 was far from a reskin. BF 2142 might be one of the most inventive and fun Battlefield games in the franchise. You can tell DICE went all out with this game and created everything from their own imagination, rather than just recreating real-world settings and weapons. This would be the last PC-exclusive Battlefield game, and the end of an era for the franchise. 2142 brings back all the features that made Battlefield 2 so popular, but also introduces some awesome new concepts and make it difficult to understand why DICE hasn't made a sequel to this. Battlefield 2142 continues the trend of not including a single-player campaign, and has one of the weakest offline modes since the conception of the franchise. Only 5 maps are available offline with bots by default, and only the smallest 16-player versions are playable. You can't even play the brand new Titan mode offline, which is a real shame considering it's arguably the best part of the game. Thankfully, I managed to find a few modifications online that made every map available offline, including maps from the Northern Strike expansion. I also tweaked the maximum number of bots from the default 16 up to 64 to bring back the feel of the original game. The bots behave about as you'd expect with Refactor Engine 2.0. They follow fixed paths to and from objectives, and if you happen to be along this path when you ask for ammo or health, they'll occasionally help you out. I did run into a few AI bugs when I modified the game files and introduced more maps, but that's kind of to be expected. The pathing just isn't perfect. You can see these guys all getting stuck on the catwalk up here. The multiplayer component of 2142 expanded on what DICE accomplished with Battlefield 2 and provided even more progression and unlockables. The squad system and commander system both make a return, with both receiving minor tweaks to go along with the futuristic gameplay. Squad members are rewarded temporary bonus unlocks for completing objectives, gaining access to weapons and items they were interested in unlocking early. Squad leaders had access to special gadgets that they could equip, like the squad beacon, which allowed other players in the squad to spawn in over a drop zone, directly over where the beacon is placed. They could also call in tiny recon drones, sometimes armed with twin machine guns, that would fly around the squad leader's head and spot enemies for them. Commanders had very negligible changes made. They could still call in supplies, vehicles, scans, UAVs, and artillery strikes, only now the artillery strikes have been replaced with orbital strikes, which are basically just glorified artillery strikes. The commanders also had the ability to relocate their team's Titan warship in the Titan game mode, though a lot of servers were against this feature as moving the airship generally resulted in a lot of lag. Thanks to the Battlefield Revive project, I managed to get the game running at 1920 by 1080 and have access to populated online servers, so I was able to get some footage of the Titan game mode. And if you're interested, there are still active servers playing Titan mode today. Battlefield 2142 continued building upon the progression system that BF2 introduced and offered even more things to unlock. Now, in addition to primary weapons, players can unlock several unique and futuristic gadgets, like a device that would render the player almost invisible, or a landmine shaped like a soccer ball that would follow enemy vehicles. DICE encouraged players to experiment with different combinations of gadgets and weapons to suit every player's unique playstyle, which really helped make 2142 stand out. This level of customization was so well received, it's been a staple of the franchise for over a decade now. While the engine itself is the same as Battlefield 2, 2142 is vastly different in how it plays thanks to the large variety of creative futuristic weapon designs and gadgets. This significantly larger level of customization made for a more interesting firefight. Players quickly embraced the variety and thought of creative ways to gain edges. It was important to play with a squad that had good knowledge of all the game's gadgets and quirks to be successful, and there were a lot of things to remember, from EMPs to escape pods to walking tanks. So let's try to briefly break it all down by talking about the game's featured classes first. Battlefield 2142 went back to a more simplistic approach when it came to classes, and only offers 4 classes: Recon, Assault, Support, and Engineer. These 4 classes have remained the primary classes for Battlefield games now for over 10 years because of how well they worked in Battlefield 2142. Thanks to the new customization options, Recon now served a more broad audience. Players who enjoyed sniping could equip a few different bolt-action rifles that all generally took about 2 shots to the body to kill. You could also zoom in with the mouse wheel when aiming down the scopes. Snipers generally brought with them APM mines, which were basically just fancy-looking claymores. There were also scope stabilizers and sniper decoy tool that could be used to fool enemies by displaying a sniper icon on their minimap. Recon users could also equip a carbine rifle that loaded rounds on the side via cassette tape. This gun had a high rate of fire and was excellent for sneaking around the enemy. In addition to the weapon, stealthy recon players could also unlock a cloaking device that would render them mostly invisible. This device was very effective when trying to cross fields far away from the enemies, but up close, enemies generally could see you pretty well. If you were hit by an EMP while wearing the cloaking device, your character would light up bright colors, making you stand out significantly. The Assault class offered assault rifles, grenades, and medical supplies. You could equip airburst rockets and underbarrel shotguns to use if you were more interested in killing the enemy, or you could equip health kits and strange-looking defibrillators if you wanted to play more of a medic role. The Support class had access to LMGs, ammunition, and anti-personnel equipment like this turret. The LMGs were odd in 2142 because the longer you held down the fire button, the more accurate your gun would become. The downside to this was that your weapon would overheat pretty quickly with long suppressive fire, and finding that sweet spot between long burst and accuracy took a lot of practice. The Support class eventually had access to a short-range shotgun as well, one of the only primary shotguns featured in the game. The Engineer class had access to several forms of anti-tank capabilities. They had large anti-tank rifles or rocket launchers that could take out some tanks with one shot if you hit them in their weak spot in the rear. The Engineer could also equip a repair tool, EMP mines that served to disable enemy vehicles, and those awesome motion mines that look like soccer balls and follow enemy vehicles until they explode on impact. 2142 also features some futuristic vehicles that you won't find anywhere else. The cars in the game were small 3-seater vehicles that had a driver's seat, a gunner, and a transport seat in the trunk. These cars were incredibly fast thanks to the turbo boost, but could be destroyed very easily. 2142 doesn't really offer any naval combat. The storyline behind the game suggests that water in the year 2142 was a rare resource, so it makes sense that naval combat was not featured in this game. The European Union had access to a pretty basic tank that had a seriously long scope, making it great for long-range tank battles. They were also very strong and could take few more hits than the Pan-Asian Coalition's hover tank. The Pan-Asian hover tank had no way to rotate the top turret, but had the capability to strafe left and right when moving and firing. This made it incredibly agile, but difficult to control at times. It also had a severe weak spot in the rear, and one anti-tank shot to the back vent could cause it to explode instantly. Both tanks had a rechargeable shield that could be used to deflect explosive impacts. One of the more unique vehicles in 2142 were the Walkers. The Walkers were bipedal tanks that had twin machine guns and could rapid-fire missiles. The secondary position was capable of dealing serious damage to enemy infantry and could also deal with hostile aircraft. These Walkers were much more maneuverable than the average tank and took several shots to destroy. Both teams had access to their own APCs. APCs could be used to deliver large groups of foot soldiers across the field safely, and also featured a machine gun turret for the driver, an EMP shot that could be used to disable enemy vehicles, and the secondary gunner position could arc explosive impact grenades on enemies, making this an ideal anti-personnel vehicle. The passenger seats also had escape pods that could be used to gain an elevated position, or even board enemy Titans. The Titans were a massive airship that had fully explorable interiors, weapon systems, and could be destroyed by missile silos on the ground, or destroyed from the inside out by hostile invaders. They were only available in the Titan game mode, and served as a primary objective for both teams. If players managed to bring the opposing team's Titan shield down, they could either continue controlling missile silo control points on the ground to deplete the Titan's health, or they could board the Titan themselves using APC pods or transport aircraft, and destroy the core from the inside out. Battles inside the Titan were difficult thanks to the narrow corridors and constant grenade spam, but running out the back of the Titan as it explodes was one of the coolest parts of the game. You could also utilize the Titan's defensive weapons from the consoles in the hangar. You could use escape pods built into the side, or you could just fly out of the hangar in air transports and gunships. There were two types of aircraft in Battlefield 2142. The air transport could hold tons of players and had two side miniguns that could devastate enemies below, and even destroy other hostile aircraft with ease. It had a defensive shield that could be deployed and would require recharge just like the ground vehicles. The gunship was a fast-moving 2-seater attack craft that could rapid-fire missiles that would follow enemy aircraft and could potentially dominate the battlefield. Anti-aircraft launchers from the Engineer could typically take care of these pretty easily, but a skilled pilot could really change the tide of the match. 2142 featured only 10 maps at launch, with only 5 of those being available offline with bots. DICE eventually added 7 more maps to the game with free patches, but most of these maps were actually community made by groups like the SIR community. Battlefield 2142 was the first game in the franchise to offer downloadable content. Northern Strike was the only expansion available for 2142 and offered 3 new maps along with a few new vehicles and 1 new gadget for each class. These maps were pretty underwhelming. It didn't really offer much else to the experience other than the Goliath, a massive behemoth of a tank that moved slowly and could regenerate health quickly until the several weak spots were destroyed. The new vehicles were only available on the 3 new maps, but the new gadgets like the sticky grenade launcher were available across all maps and modes. The game featured many locations in Europe and the Middle East, but the game itself didn't seem to offer much in terms of variety. Many of the maps looked about the same and even reused the same assets like bunkers, towers, and catwalks. Some maps had sand and some maps had snow. Some maps even made a return in 2142 like the famous Wake Island, which has now technically been featured in each Battlefield game so far if you include that World War II mod for Battlefield Vietnam. Battlefield 2142 might be one of the most balanced Battlefield games in the entire franchise. Some of the maps in 2142 were completely balanced with both teams having no control points at the start of the match and several neutral flags being available in a relatively rounded out map. A few of the maps like Camp Gibraltar and Cerberi Landing required one team to attack with no objectives at the start while the other team tried desperately to defend against them. The defending team had no uncappable bases, meaning if all the flags were captured by the enemy, the defenders could lose instantly. The attacking team generally was given more tickets and offered vehicles to help them get a foothold, like a walker, and matches were generally pretty even, with both teams managing their own. Squad beacons introduced a new level of paranoia to the game, as enemy squad leaders could cleverly hide beacons off the beaten path, and enemies would continuously spawn in to harass your team. Since players that spawned on beacons were forced in a drop pod, it was pretty simple to figure out where these beacons were located. But sometimes players would find ways to exploit the game and land on top of inaccessible rooftops like the skyscrapers in Fall of Berlin, making for incredibly difficult matches. Every weapon, gadget, and vehicle seemed to have some kind of counter, meaning nothing really felt truly overpowered. I do remember getting a little bit frustrated with the Voss and the airburst shot, but for the most part they had some pretty significant counters. 2142 wasn't as big when it came to mods as its predecessor, but the Star Wars mod First Strike was incredibly popular and allowed you to play with Star Wars characters using the Battlefield engine. This single player mod I'm using here is amazing because it makes me feel like I'm much better at this game than I probably am. And that pretty much sums up all of 2142. Not everyone embraced the inventive, futuristic take on Battlefield, but for those who did, they generally all agree that 2142 was something special. I would love to see DICE return to this game and give us a brand new one using the Frostbite engine. And I'm not talking about a $15 version or some kind of DLC for an existing game. I'm talking about a full Battlefield 2143 game. But for now, this is what we're stuck with, and thankfully there's a few mods that keep this game alive. I hope you guys enjoyed this look back at 2142. Stay tuned next time for Battlefield's big console debut and Battlefield Bad Company. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest gaming retrospectives.